risk adjusted backlog work. And this risk adjusted backlog give you a proper visibility, and you have all the necessary things in place to find out where to adjust the risk and at what time you need to adjust the risk. So attributing a dollar figure to both the functional and non-functional requirement allow the team to have the more meaningful discussion with the sponsor and the user. For example, we can see that risk, for example, risk to have expected monetary value 4,000, and as a result, when it is a time to select the requirement or the feature for upcoming iteration, the risk response action associated with the risk 2 now has a similar ranking to the risk requirement number 2. So in other words, a risk response added that did not seem to have a compelling business value now makes sense, because we can show it that that have an equal value to the organizations. So if you ask me, we are not focusing more on the precision of the number. The guess multiplied by the guess is unlikely to be highly accurate. So instead of, for example, in this case, instead of the purpose of this exercise is to facilitate a better discussion with the business representative about how to best sequence the work item. So if people start rigging the number of severe personal agenda, the purpose of the true power of the process will be lost. So the technical dependencies and the sponsor mandate will take precedent over sequence derived from this approach. So think of a risk adjusted backlog as a tool that you number only to get what they truly want. And the priority of the work item that need to be done from the backlog. So the true benefit of this tool are that it helps the business representative and the development team bridge a communication gap and have meaningful discussion about schedule and scope trade-off. So although we assign numbers value to help level the playing field, and creating a risk adjusted backlog is really more of a qualitative practice than a quantitative practice. So if we go further, there are few best practices that can be used while doing the risk assessment in the backlog. One is considering risk-based spike. So in Agile, a spike is a short proof of concept to investigate an issue further. So some of the reason behind the spike include testing different method to achieve the same result, as well as testing to confirm that the desired result is attainable through the current project approach. For example, a team might perform a spike to see if they can code an application in one language as opposed to the another. So a risk-based spike is a spike that is carried out in response to the known risk. So these can also be opportunities or maybe threat, right? So the team might find out that using a different programming language can speed up the development, or they might find out that they can't use the one they had planned to use. So these spikes would be added to the backlog as a mitigation actions. Risk-based spike are useful because can often lead to fast failure, because when you use it as a spike, you have a greater opportunity to finish it as soon as possible and then come up with the conclusion that whether they are going to help us in the project, or they are going to delay us in the project, or maybe any other repercussion that happened because of that spike. So in other words, a team can use a risk-based spike to discover that the approach they planned out will not work, and they need to have a new approach. So this discovery may seem like a huge problem at the first. However, the sooner this problem is discovered, the sooner it can be corrected, so that the team can return to focus on delivering the value. So risk-based spike can be used in that term to identify whether this risk in future will be mitigated or we need to avoid this risk, right? So the next is building risk into the estimation process. So when estimating the stories, team should also keep risk in mind. In fact, an estimation session can be a good place to record information about risk that would cause one story to be estimated higher. For example, if the three team members rate a story as 8 in terms of the story point, and another team member might point out that if there are problems with the scheduled upgrade, the story could easily be 20 story point. So this conversation would prompt additional discussion as to how the team can prevent the story from being 20 point, generating potential risk response take for the backlog. So don't whenever team takes such risk into consideration, don't discourage the team because they have a valid reason why they are adjusting the risk into their estimation, right? Because ultimately what is going to happen is that the time which you are going to save because of this risk estimation approach is that you would find the delay in the project as soon as the risk will occur. So if it does not occur, it is okay, but if it occurred, then it become difficult to justify the delay in the project at the last than at the early stage of the project. So next is the keeping the risk adjusted backlog up to the date, and this is very important. So like we have seen how risk being adjusted, we have burned down chart or risk burned down chart that define that how the risk is being assessed and detect, and then the response has been uh, planned. To keep that graph and everything updated, because as a part of the backlog grooming process during and the between the sprint, the team should make sure that any risk adjusted item in the backlog are updated as a risk approach, and the new information can affect the probability and impact of the risk. So keeping this information up to date is a key part of keeping the risk adjusted backlog relevant. So failing to update the risk adjustment present both risk related and communication related issues. So first, by failing to update risk mean that the team could be missing out on the new risk. So second, failing to update the risk mean that existing information about risk has changed. So if the risk themselves have lessened or gone away, so stakeholder may get a wrong idea about risk if the risk contingency reserve shows high value of remaining risk even in the middle or the end phase of the project. So to make sure that the risk adjusted backlog is communicating the correct amount of risk for the project, make sure that those risks are up to date. So because if you have placed one risk adjusted backlog in your scrum area, you have risk burn down chart in your scrum area, and you have one chart where risk avoid, mitigate, or transfer, or accepted have been given. If these risks are not updated, somewhere it give a wrong picture to the all the stakeholders that are involved into the project, and we need to define another process to get it done. So don't go into creating process over process, or you are not following one process and then you are creating another process to do the same thing. These are the risk basic practices, and now a few of the common pitfall which can be overcome with the risk best practices that we have used. So for example, failing to account for all the risk. So on any project, not just the agile project, I would say it is important to make sure that as many risks are documented and planned for as possible, and missing a risk can mean missing out on an opportunity to save money and time. So freeing up more resources to add value to the customer, right? So it can also mean missing out on a threat that would rob the project of value by requiring rework or brainstorming on the new approach. So risks that are not planned for could be catastrophic to the point of causing project failure. So some risks like natural disaster may not have much of the response other than to be accepted, but they will need to be known. For example, when I was working on one of the project and we were using automation framework, and that framework is being developed by a few of the team members. So they are not using the tools that are available in the market, like Selenium and the other tool, to do the automation. But we spend good amount of time, that is 1.2 years, to estimate to complete the almost 70 to 80% of the project in the automation mode of testing. But what we realize that after 1.2 years, because we are working on one version of the Angular, that is 1.6, and now we have taken uh, a decision to move to the Angular version 6, but not Angular version 6. We are also using another technology, that is Canvas, in between, because we're working in a gaming industry at that time. So now what happened is that all the effort which we have taken, or we have spent on this automation project for 1.2 years, are on the toss. So yes, we mitigate this risk, and we try to understand with a simple set of uh, a POC, that if we move ourselves from Angular 6 to the Canvas, how best we can convert our existing project into the upcoming new technology, and still save our time that we have already spent on the automation of the project. The next is not involving the right people, and this is very important. So because this is a key piece of getting all risks recorded, is involving the right people in the risk planning. And for an agile team, that might mean reaching out to the others in the organization who are not on the team, but can provide insight into risk that threaten the team's goal. So others in the business who can provide input include product manager, executive, and testers. It is important to get a wide variety of insight into possible risk. For example, the product owner can provide risk from a business standpoint, while the scrum master can provide the risk on his or her perception of how closely the team is following the methodology. So team can also look to the historical information and lesson learned from the previous project to find more insight into possible risk to their release and the sprint goal. So ideally, lesson learned should incorporate all members of the team in order to provide the most value. So in agile methodology, team derived much of the process, which make it important that they know when to seek additional guidance of identifying possible risk. So that is how this is a two major pitfall that exist. One, you are not taking into account all the risk, and that might be a possibility because you are not involving the right person to get the risk assessment done. And of course, in the previous slide we discussed that you should you know um, update the risk as soon as possible, or you always keep your risk burn down chart or risk chart up to date. So if you're not doing it, the failing, if you're not doing it, you are failing to discuss the risk regularly. So what happens is that agile gives a team plenty of opportunities to communicate key information about the project, that include release and sprint planning meeting, daily scrum meeting, sprint review meeting, and sprint retrospective meeting, scrum of scrum meeting, and any of these ceremonies or event present ample amount of opportunities to discuss key risk on the project and get the latest information. So having the latest information allow a team to take action as needed. So in daily scrum, it is typically to ask team member if they have any issue or barrier facing them. So including risk at this time is a good way to get update and plan necessary responses. So if we draw a conclusion, so what we have discussed so far, so risks are just as important to identify and deal with on an agile project as they are on any other project. So fortunately, there are many tools available to help the agile project as well. So in addition to the risk adjusted backlog, there is also a risk burn down chart, another popular tool which is similar to the sprint burn down chart, but instead showing the impact of the risk over time. So whether team uses a burn down chart or add risk to adjust their backlog, performing risk management is a key part of ensuring that the customer is receiving the value. So if you are a scrum master of the team, and in this session, it means that now you have a visibility that risk adjusted backlog or risk burn down chart are very, very important. So always keep an eye that they are always up to date. If you're a product owner, make sure that the chart exists. Make sure that burn down risk adjusted backlog or the burn down chart exists, and team is continuously updating them and working on them. If you're agile project manager, make sure that all the project owner or team member or the team are working on this risk adjusted backlog. They have taken stories to mitigate the risk, to accept the risk, or to transfer the risk. um, and if you're a development team, you know that if you don't adjust the risk estimation when you're doing the estimation, you may at the end of the sprint fall into a trap where you are not identifying the risk, and because of that there is the issue that is happening. So always always have an eye on the risk, because that are the one who are going to define that whether your project is going to complete on time, or you're going to work on this project, or you're going to lose this project, or project may be scrapped because of unidentified risk. Thank you.